I then imagined all these women in golden cages, and they just wouldn't fly out the door because their house wasn't organized enough, and often their spouse had not given them permission to leave the house until their homework was done. They're looking at Instagram, and then they're looking at their house, and they're like, yep, I'm not done yet. Yep, I'm not done yet. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Let's get this organized enough so that you feel comfortable that you've done your responsibility. We have got to stop selling the aesthetic of design and organization containers to women that is never ending. Let's stop going for the A. No one's coming to your house anyway. Like, nobody's looking. Nobody cares. Free up this time for you to explore what you're uniquely gifted and created to do.
Most of us think getting organized means having a better system, a cleaner space, or a longer to-do list. But what if the real issue is the mental load we keep carrying and what that load is keeping us from becoming? Today I'm joined by Lisa Woodruff, founder of Organized 365 and author of The Paper Solution. We talk about why organization feels so overwhelming and how it connects to executive function, and why getting organized may be less about control and more about creating the capacity to move forward. Lisa, how are you?
I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I get to talk to you about organization and how it impacts motivation and outcomes. This is a very, I think, personal question that I have around this is just organization in itself. Like, why is that so important to any achievement of goals?
Yeah, boy, so many places we could go with this. I think that I did research in 2021 and I asked people about organization, and the American population said that they trust a leader who is organized. They believe someone who is organized is a better leader. So it's interesting when we have our physical space organized or we appear to be organized, there's a different perceived confidence that we have or leadership ability that we have, which is kind of like a soft skill. And often when we think about organization, we do think about the physical space. Like, do you have a lot of clutter or don't you have a lot of clutter? In my work in understanding organization, especially as it relates to the household, sometimes that doesn't tell the full picture. And while I think organization is a great place to start, ultimately it is, do you have set and achieve goals? Are you purposeful and productive in things that really matter? Or are you just busy tidying spaces over and over again that don't actually give you as much meaning as maybe a more cluttered environment might with bigger goals?
That's very interesting. I want to know, what is organization? How would you define that?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And I told you that I am finishing up my PhD. And what I found is a lot of the things that we talk about in the household are not very well operationally defined. So an operational definition is a universally agreed upon definition that scientists that can then use to run research studies and compare results. So we don't have an operational definition of housework. I don't know as we have an operational definition of organization either. I know for me and for my audience, it really is a feeling. Like, sometimes it can look like you're not organized, but you feel organized. And other times it can look like you're really organized, but you're like, it's a house of cards. Like, under the hood, like, I'm a hot mess. So I think it is both an aesthetic and a feeling. And the reason why I think that we look to the aesthetic so much is because that's the only way to monetize organization in a capitalist society. So you can monetize the containers that we buy, or you can monetize, things like that, the way something is going to look, a decorative style, a minimalist, or, like a feng shui type thing. You can't really monetize a feeling. And so I just think it's an interesting jumping off point for a conversation about what truly is organization. Is it an aesthetic? Is it a feeling? Is it a combination of both?
It's a very interesting perspective, because I never really thought about it that way. There's that internal organization, the things that you're talking about in terms of the feelings based, and then there's the external, the things that you could see, feel, and touch, and kind of coordinate and compartmentalize. So let's talk about those two things. There's an interesting dichotomy there. So when we talk about that internal feeling of organization, what would somebody want to be aware of to understand if they are organized internally?
Yeah, so my more recent research in the last 5 years has really thought about that internal organization. There's a big conversation going on in the media about how women are doing more cognitive labor at home, the invisible work. That's true. Research will support that. If you're not in a coupled relationship, if you're living in your own household and you're a man, then you're doing it too because there isn't a spouse to divide that work. And often in academia, we limit our subjects to married couples with children under 18 because we know there's a lot of load when you're a parent. And we know that there is a male-female dynamic or a relationship dynamic when you're in a coupled relationship. But if you're not in a coupled relationship and or you don't have young children, we don't have a lot of data on what happens in those households. So I'm really seeking out that information. And additionally, when we look at this invisible family load, like not what does the house look like, but how do we get things on the calendar? How do we plan for the holidays? How do we do all of those things that just seem to magically happen all of the time? There is a lot of cognitive load. And in science, when you look at cognitive load, you're going to go into executive function. And everyone knows that executive function leads to ADHD, where many people will say they have ADHD, self-prescribed or actually prescribed, or I feel like I'm getting a little bit more ADHD every day. That's a big conversation going on. And really what we're talking about is our executive functions. And there are 8 of them. And these 8 executive functions are all at varying levels of support for every individual. And 5 of them are actually related to the work that I do. So organization is an executive function. Planning is an executive function. Getting started, the ability to initiate tasks, that's an executive function. So a lot of the things when we go to organize in our households, especially where we say, I just don't know what to do next. It feels like this is never going to end. That is all your executive function going, I would rather go out and play or get ice cream, please. Why are you making me clean my room?
So if the executive function, you mentioned all 8 of them, what are the 8?
Some are emotionally based, and I don't really specialize in the ones that are emotionally based, and the rest are cognitive. So they are flexible thinking. This is when you're looking at a room in your house, especially that you've looked at 8 million times, you're like, it's just not working. It's just not functioning, but you can't come up with any other ideas for how to organize that space. That's flexible thinking. Working memory is the ability to hold information in your head while you're doing something else. So you're buying something on the phone, and then you have to get a passcode sent to your email so you can finish checkout. So you go over to email, you memorize the passcode, you come back, you put the passcode in. That's your working memory. Self-monitoring, this is a big one, especially I see in kids. I used to be a teacher with ADHD. That's knowing how much longer it's going to take before you're finished. Like you start a project that's going to be an hour long, and in minute 5, you go, this is going to take 5 days. When really it's going to take 1 hour, like your ability to know how long it's going to take to do it. Task initiation, I mentioned, is the ability to start new tasks. And what's interesting in that one, especially with children that I've worked with in schools, is you think that starting the task is getting started on the laundry. Yes, and it's going in and moving the laundry to the dryer and then starting the next load. Like each of those things need to be initiated. So each of them is a starting. Then there's planning, as I mentioned. And planning is the ability to stop doing everything else and think into the future about like, okay, what is the order in which I should do things? What should I green light next? How am I going to get all of this done in the time that I have allotted? And then organization is the last one.
It's interesting as I'm listening to all 8 of those, I'm trying to organize them in my mind right now and I'm overwhelmed. I'm like, that in itself is cognitive overload. So where have you found in those where people are most stuck?
So that's what's interesting. And I didn't mention the emotional ones or the impulse control is an emotional one, the 2-year-old darting into the street. And the other one is emotional regulation, crying at the drop of a hat or not being able to hold in your anger when someone ticks you off on the road. Okay, so your question was, where do people get stuck? This is the complicated part. All of the above. So the first one that we see in schools often is working memory, especially as the math teacher. I was the math teacher because there's a lot you have to hold in your head in order to do long division or things like that when you're learning. Whereas you can get by in some classes like language by just being a chatty Cathy, and you don't really have to hold as much in your head. So we see that working memory, that hard holding on to different pieces, and we can measure working memory in tests fairly easily to see where you are on your working memory. Some of the other ones are harder to show on psychological screenings, but it's different. It's different for each person.
So based on those 8 that you mentioned, is there anything that somebody can do to improve in any of those 8? Like what specifically would they have to do? Because some of it seems very daunting. I think for
Mm-hmm.
myself, I'm a procrastinator by nature. So there's
Mm-hmm.
times that I overestimate the time a task will take, but then when I get involved in it, I realize, wow, like I really overwhelmed myself unnecessarily. I could actually do this in a much shorter time. So in cases like that or in the other executive functions, what would somebody have to do to approach them in a way that could help minimize maybe the initial pain that they're projecting?
First of all, I love this question, and I'm going to give you some hypotheses that I have not been able to test in science yet. But this is exactly the reason why I invested 3.5 years and $1 bazillion in getting a PhD, because your question is the same question I have that science is not answering right now. So I met with one of the leading ADHD researchers here in Cincinnati who specializes in childhood ADHD. And so there are many things that happen at Cincinnati Children's Hospital where we test both pharmaceutical intervention and also things that can be done in the classroom or at home in order to support these executive functions in children who are diagnosed with ADHD. And as soon as you turn 19, all of those resources go away, all that funding goes away. And there are no scientists that I know of that are researching this not from a pharmaceutical angle. So when you're an adult with ADHD, the only tools in the medical toolbox are prescriptions, because we have not done studies on adults with alternative interventions to support executive function. So friend of mine about 10 years ago said, Lisa, wouldn't it be funny if we found out that you have ADHD and the products that you created for household managers actually externalize executive function and support household managers? And I go, ha ha ha, Monique, it'd be really funny if we find out I have ADHD. Well, it turns out I have ADHD. So now that I've gotten the PhD, that is the first thing we're going to start to do is testing this intervention that I've created. It's just an external box that sits on your kitchen counter where you can put your actionable to-dos and tasks and projects you have going on so they're not running around in your brain. And then you set aside a time weekly to plan out those tasks and get more accomplished, as opposed to just trying to continually check things off of a to-do list. So I think the products and courses that I've created in my company support executive function, and my customers will tell me that that's their observation as well, just through self-observation. But we don't have any science to show us that yet, but we will.
So that's interesting. Can you tell us what is ADHD and how does that impact executive functioning?
Yeah, so the clinical diagnosis of ADHD, and I'm not going to be that kind of doctor. I'm not a clinical psychologist, just able to do research. But the clinical diagnosis of ADHD is when your executive functioning, whichever executive functions they are deficient to the point that it affects your everyday life. And a doctor will say that we could intervene with a pharmaceutical intervention that may help you set goals, achieve goals, and function in your life better with this pharmaceutical intervention. In schools, so when we're looking at children, there's usually a pharmaceutical component, but sometimes you cannot use ADHD medications, and there are different ADHD medications. So in schools, obviously, we don't prescribe anything as teachers, and we need to help support children. So what we do is we do a couple of different things. One, depending on where the child is challenged, we could offer, a cheat sheet. So when they're doing something, instead of having to remember everything in their head, they can use the cheat sheet as part of their working memory so they can actually complete the task. If they have a hard time starting tasks, then maybe after we give the assignment to the whole class, we would walk over to that student. We'd say, why don't we do number one together and get them started, and then they're able to do the rest. If they get overwhelmed by how much there is to do, then we could take the worksheet. Let's say it has 20 problems on it, and they would get a worksheet that has 10 problems on it, or they may have a worksheet that has 5 on the front and 5 on the back, so they don't see so much and they don't get so overwhelmed. There are just so many things that we do as teachers in the classroom that support executive function, externally scaffolding that for them so that they can be successful in learning and completing tasks. The biggest problem I see now as an adult is that in work and in school, there's a lot of structures and supports and people. In households, you're on your own. So it's much harder to self-initiate getting started or to break down a task when it's just you, yourself, and I.
Yeah, it's like you mentioned, the scaffolds are maybe more structured in external environments like school
Yeah.
and work and whatnot. but internally in your household, it's not really that structured. We don't all have a household where there's a manual on how to act, behave, and live every single day, right? So we don't have
Yeah.
core values on our wall. We may have family values and whatnot, but so how would somebody then really be able to take control of their own executive function with the absence of not having that blueprint?
Yeah. So for me, like I was just recently diagnosed with ADHD. It's never really
And
been a
sorry,
deficit
Lisa,
in.
and just explain that definition, ADHD.
So attention deficit hyperactivity disorder is the what that stands for. And then there's a debate of if it's hyperactivity or not, and if it's one type or six types. I mean, you could go down this rabbit trail all day.
Hmm.
But essentially, I asked a psychologist, do you think that I have ADHD? And she's like, I don't think you have ADHD. And I was like, no, really, look, do I or don't I have it? And the reason why I mask it pretty well is because I'm an entrepreneur. And before that, I was a stay at home mom. Like I've always been in charge of my own schedule. So I haven't had to really answer to anyone. And I have the freedom to move about my life in the way that I want to. And I'm really good at planning organization and setting goals. So any deficiencies I have in impulsivity are mitigated by that strength in being organized and planning.
So yeah, and before I cut you off, you were talking about how somebody in their household would establish that structure of executive functioning.
Yeah. So in the book, How ADHD Affects Home Organization, I go through each of those 6 out of 8 executive functions that a professional organizer or I, as a teacher, could support you in a household of creating more structure. The truth is, if you're really struggling with ADHD at home, the best intervention at home and at school is always going to be another human. So in schools, if we can give you a tutor, if we can put an aide in the classroom, if we can have the teacher, you have closer proximity to the teacher, you're going to be more successful. Same at home. Like you really do well in having someone else hold you accountable and or get you started or remove roadblocks as you're going through the work that you're doing. That's not always possible. So inside of the Organized 365 products and services that I offer, we usually have, well, we have a community component for everything in our private app, but we also have co-working times. So if you don't want to do your Sunday basket, that's fine, but we're all going to do it together at 5 o'clock Eastern on Sunday. And so if you know you're not going to do it, if somebody else isn't doing it with you, you log on to the Zoom and then you sit there and do that while everybody else is doing it.
So when you talk about ADHD, and this term comes up a lot, so it's very interesting to use this in the same stream of organization, planning, and execution, etc. So for somebody, we think about where we are right now, where we're in a very distracted age right now. We got social media, we got these little quick fixes of dopamine hits every time we pick up our phone. Whether you're on your work computer, on your laptop, you probably have 5,000 tabs open, and only 4,999 of them are not work related. So
Yeah.
you have these things that are happening where it just really kind of takes your attention away in those moments. Would would that be something more prevalent now than in the past? And does that fall to the, I guess, to the characterization of ADHD?
So I have opinions on this, but I don't have scientific fact to back me up. I feel like I have to give these disclaimers now since I am doing research. So through my observation, and I said this long before I knew I had ADHD, I've been saying this for decades. I really believe that our executive function and what we're calling a deficit in executive function right now, I think it's an evolution of the brain. Like to your point, like when I was a kid, it didn't show up in my schoolwork because I was very obedient and I sat there and, the kid that literally stuck his tongue to the flagpole in 8th grade, he definitely was probably ADHD. But he also wasn't diagnosed. Like we all just kind of towed the line and did what we were supposed to do. We just screwed around every once in a while. But I do think that executive function is a muscle. Like your brain is a muscle. And if you use it, then you can improve it. If you don't work it out, then it'll get lazy. And so I think that I am not pro or anti medication. I have seen medication for people with ADHD create night and day differences for how people are able to function. I definitely see that there is a place for it. And also, there are a lot of things that you could do to support your environment and support your brain in addition to using pharmaceutical intervention. Kind of like with diabetes, you could take diabetes medicine, but if you're just going to keep eating fast food all the time, like, is it really going to work very well? Like, you have to do these things in relation with each other. And as we get to AI now, like this AI that's coming out this year, I'm like, oh, I'm hearing people use AI to verbally process, and I'm a verbal processor. I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. There are a lot of people whose ears are going to stop bleeding around me because I'm always talking, because I could just be talking to AI about it. Like, there are some things that we are doing to help us process that we maybe could be using AI for, and that would be really fun.
What do you mean by that, verbal processing with AI?
Yeah, so and not just ADHD, but I am a person where if I become more clearer in what I think and how I word what I think when I'm talking to you than if I just sit here and think about it in my head. And so what I hear now people are doing is they're just, talking to Gemini or Chat GPT or whatever their friend of choice is, and they just talk about what they're thinking. And then when they say, what did you hear me say? Or what was the most salient point? Or in my case, I could just talk to it and not even ask what it thinks, and I would be more clear about what I think.
Well,
But it's that act of thinking you're talking to someone else.
and how does that impact organization though? Because when you think about that internal place where you need to start, a lot of it has to do with your own self-dialogue, maybe connecting with people who know you more intimately, not synthetically like an AI.
Yeah,
But in a lot of cases, getting that human to human contact may not be readily available. Like you said, there may be
right.
some single, individual households that may not have that person there. Other people are living their lives, so AI becomes kind of like that gateway point where you really have no other choice. So how does somebody really look at that opportunity to be more, I guess, organized and understand their own thinking from an executive functioning place if there's so many of these other tools available that are instantaneous? Like, why would I want to talk to a person at this point?
Yeah, it's so interesting. I'm just starting to think this way. My big thing is I don't like to do rework. Like, I don't like to do something and then do it again. So I'm kind of waiting for the AI leader to emerge so that I can just learn one platform, which a few months ago would have been Chat GPT, but now I hear it's definitely Claude. You know what I mean? And I'm like, yeah, but 3 months from now, what's it going to be? Like, I don't want to learn a whole bunch of systems, so I haven't invested a lot of time in it. Such an interesting question that you raise. Something else you said that I kind of wanted to point out is back in 1985, when the research came out that women were doing more work at home, and we started looking at housework in a gender lens and looking at the population of married couples with children under the age of 18, we had about 40% of the population that was married with children under the age of 14. So we were eliminating about 60% of the population in those studies. Today, that number is 17.9% of couples are married with children under the age of 18, which means that more than 80% of the population are not really represented in studies that are using that sample size. We have many single parents. I don't know if you know this, but 40% of children every year are born to a single parent. Found that out when my daughter had her baby. And I looked it up and I was like, holy cow, that's a lot of single parents, single mothers, like 40%. That's a really large amount. Then you have married or unmarried couples with children over 18. You have people who have remained single or cohabitate or were widowed. So when we're looking at, the population that is not married, it is a very large population. It's actually more rare to be married than to be unmarried, but we don't really think about it that way. So this is really something that society is probably wrestling with a lot, but is not being talked about.
So for somebody like myself, who, when I think about being organized, for me, the first thing I think about is like, oh, that just seems like such a big task. It's like
Oh,
I usually use maybe sticky notes if there's some very important details that I want to remember. But honestly, Lisa, everything that I keep in terms of my planning is in my head. And I've just been accustomed that way because I think any tool that I use, electronic or paper or whatnot, just seems like it's adding on more work, which is going to add more stress on. So, what would you say to somebody like myself?
so I do think that using electronic organizers does add more cognitive load. And that is one of my orientations as a researcher. The research that I have found supports that when you write something down on that sticky note by hand, what you're actually doing is encoding that information into your long-term memory out of your working memory. So you're literally taking it out of your working memory and increasing your cognitive capacity by not holding that in that part of your brain anymore. It's still in there, but it's not in that part where you're just like thinking about it over and over and over again. The pushback I get to writing things down on paper is, then I got to keep track of the paper, Lisa. I'm like, I know, I understand. I understand this is a new problem that I've created. But the alternative is either to remember it in your brain, which means you lose that cognitive capacity, or to store it electronically. I'm not a fan of storing things electronically. I do have a Google Calendar. We are meeting on a, platform through the computer. I use a computer all day long. I'm not, chiseling things on a stone tablet or anything. But for me, once things are in a digital location, they are out of sight and they are out of mind. And they are not encoded deeper in my brain. They've just left my working memory. I don't know where they've gone, out into the ether. They didn't get stuck somewhere else in my brain. They're just gone. And science will support that. And now the research that's coming out about using AI in schools, they're saying the same thing, because you're not writing it down and you're not cognitively wrestling with whatever you're doing. You're just getting the information and spitting it out to the teacher. It's not getting stuck in your brain. It's just going, I don't know where it's going, but it's not in your brain anymore. So while we are in a digital age, if you want to learn something, if you want to do something, in my observation, it needs to be in the real world. And by that, I mean somehow made material. So that's why the Sunday basket I created is paper-based. The other thing is, as your daughter gets older and she starts to get into extracurricular activities, starts to take on a part-time job, starts to look at high schools and colleges, there's going to be a lot more information management that's coming your way that she's going to want to access without you, or you're going to want to say, oh, that's in this folder. You're going to want to have that conversation back and forth. And I find that things written down on a calendar or a grocery list on the refrigerator, really as a kind of, well, you didn't put it, do you see the list right here? You didn't write it on the list. That's why it's not in the refrigerator right now. Like, we need these communication systems that tend to work better when they're on paper.
Is it something where I may be thinking like my brain naturally wants to stay stagnant? It wants to conserve energy. It doesn't want to build on new neural pathways and new processes. It likes comfort. So part of me being comfortable is knowing that I keep everything up here, that I don't write things down, because that's an extra piece of action. So I'm wondering, listening to you talk right now, I'm wondering for people as well who are along the same lines as me, that when we start doing these things, when they become habitual, they start to become something that our brains don't even notice we're doing anymore. But it's that initial messiness of getting it into habit. Do you think that's part of maybe the challenge?
Yeah, I wonder about that, not wanting to create the new neural pathways, which makes me realize how weird I am, because I'm always like, my brain is bored. How do I work it out? I've recently started working out. In my 50s, I started working out. Never worked out before in my 50s. And I was like, oh, this is exhausting. My muscles are exhausted. But my brain, I love working out my brain. And if my brain doesn't have something meaty and juicy to nibble on, it will create a new product that will put an arsonist inside of my company or whatever. Like, I have to keep my brain really engaged, because that muscle is like ready to go. I think, I don't know about the neural pathways, but what I would say about what you were saying is, sometimes, and I do this too, I hold things in my head because there's not that much in there. I'm going to be able to get it done. I don't really need to externalize it and write it on paper. And then you hit that tipping point where you're like, oh my gosh, it's like November 27th and I've got way too much in my head and I'm afraid I'm going to forget to buy Christmas presents or something. So I better start to write these things down. And at that point, when you start to write them down, there are so many things that come out of your brain that you're like, you've got to be kidding. I don't have the time and money to do all this. Like, go back in my brain. I want to pretend it's not there. So I think it's kind of like walking into a kid's bedroom that needs to be organized. And you're like, I'm just going to close this door and pretend that this room isn't in our house. We're like, no, we need to teach the kids the skills. So it's going to take the whole weekend and we're going to get the room organized. And then you feel great on Monday when the room is organized. The same thing happens when you externalize all of those things in your head. Your brain is holding on to so many things, random things that you could just totally recycle as soon as you write them down. But other things that are really important, like your parents' 50th anniversary is next year and you haven't thought about what you're going to do about that. And you need some time to be thinking about that. So there are short-term, long-term, things that are in process, things that you haven't done yet that you know you should have done by now. When you see them on paper, you're like, oh, fine, I'll just take a half day on Monday and I'll go do that thing so I don't have to think about it anymore. So like you said, that procrastination, sometimes I think we're using our brain and we're like, oh yeah, if it's important enough, I'll remember it in time. Otherwise, I'm going to pretend it doesn't really exist.
Yeah, my paper, my notepad is all in the brain. It is my number one tool. It's been hard for me to adjust, but thinking about adjusting, and earlier we were talking about the external and internal. We just talked about the internal. What are some external applications that people are aware of, maybe that they have at their disposal, or things that they may need to acquire to help with their organization and planning?
Okay, organization and planning. I think it depends on what needs to be organized. So often we think because we live in a household, it's like one thing. Just like work is one thing, house is one thing. Not really. So wherever you work, unless you're a solopreneur, there, and even at the solopreneur, you're doing all these things. Wherever you work, there's a marketing arm, there's a sales arm, there's an admin arm, there's an operations arm, there's a finance arm. And if you're a solopreneur, you do all of those things. The same happens in a household. Like you act as a CFO, you act as a chief of operations, you have a supply chain of all the junk that you use all of the time. You have to provide for all the housework that needs to be done. And so there are a lot of different roles that we have inside of the household. So as we are doing all of those roles and you say, how do we get organized? My question to you then would be, what role or task inside of your household is causing the most friction or stress in your life? And then let's solve that problem and then we'll move on to the next. So do you want me to just do one with you, or do you want me to tell you kind of the systems I've created that support all those different roles?
Yeah, let's start with the systems, and
Okay.
then maybe I'll find myself in one of those that we could talk about.
Fascinating. Okay, so the first and most obvious one is this house is disorganized and it needs to look better. Like we need to fix this house, which means we need to get rid of stuff that we don't need anymore and we need to organize our house. That is what a professional organizer will do. I was a professional organizer, and so I created the course, The Productive Home Solution. The difference between how you organize on this long weekend we have coming up at the time of this recording, or how a professional organizer will organize, is that you will organize the spaces that you use the most often, run out of energy and go, that's good enough. That looks good enough. I'm done. Whereas a professional organizer will say, no, no, no. We're also doing the storage room and the attic, and we're going to get to that extra bedroom and underneath the bed and all these spaces that you're like, I ran out of energy like 3 days ago. I don't want to do this. And she knows, or he knows, how to organize all of those spaces. So in the Productive Home Solution, it takes a little more than a year to get through all those spaces because you only have, a couple hours on the weekend to devote to this task. And I have you actually get those spaces organized. The best explanation I can give you is your storage room. So in the word storage room is the word store. Your storage room should look like a prepaid store because that's what it is. It's stuff you have there just in case you need it. That's not what your storage room looks like. It looks like a bunch of empty boxes and things that are piled on top of each other, and things you don't know what to do with, that are broken, that you just didn't want to take all the way out to the dump or whatever. And I know because I've organized hundreds of storage rooms. So I know what your storage room looks like. But when you're done organizing my way, you've put in this plastic, lightweight, ventilated shelving from Home Depot that has bins on there. What's in the bins is going to change, but the structure of the room is going to stay organized for the rest of your life. So that's what physical organization in a house looks like. Okay, the next thing is information management organization. That's your file cabinet, papers, anything that you've stored digitally. And over time, I've realized the paper solution is actually 4 kinds of paper plus kids if you have them. So the 4 kinds of paper for all adults is medical paperwork, financial paperwork, paperwork related to your house if you own it, and then operations, which is how you do cleaning, holidays, pets, parties, things like that. And that will usually take care of your file cabinet. But we have workbooks in there that you fill out too, which will pull things out of your brain and off of your computer into a universal reference system that anyone in your household can look at while you're actively in your household. And also it will support them if they ever need to be your power of healthcare, power of attorney, or settle your estate. So that's information management. Then we have planning. So we have weekly planning, which is the Sunday basket. That's where you put mail, all these little things you're going to start writing down, Dwayne, because you're going to start writing things down, right? So they got to
Oh,
go
I'm
in the
writing them
Sunday
down right
basket,
now.
right? Write them down right now. Put them in the Sunday basket and ongoing projects. So just like in business, like our work in a household doesn't start and end, in a day or 1 week. Like if you're doing a remodeling project or you're thinking about a trip you're going to take in a couple of months, you have information related to that. Where do you put that? That all goes in the Sunday basket. And then we do weekly planning to plan out our week. And then I teach you how to be the CEO of your household, not just a worker in your household or a manager. And so we do a monthly CEO session and quarterly planning for long range planning for the business called Home Planning Days.
I love that. You know what's interesting about that? It's such a very unique breakdown. Like the clutter part, I definitely get. I never looked at my storage place as a store, but you're right. It's the places that we hoard things where we know we need to potentially get rid of it, but we're giving it a time frame to see when we return back to it, which we never inevitably do.
Right. As
Which
long as you know.
as long as yeah, I'm very honest with that. There's a lot of stuff I know I have in my storage that I'm never going to get back to, but I'm just holding on to it for some
Yeah.
reason. The information management was very interesting because three out of the four things I definitely could see a lot of people using, which is the medical, which is the financial, and then the house thing. The operations one is new. Describe that one a little bit because I'm not sure a lot of people are familiar with the operations information.
Yeah. And the operations really is optional. The operations is very much how I, as a teacher, ran a household, a classroom, or how I, as a stay at home mom, ran my household. So, cleaning schedules are in there, anything related to your pets, how you do holidays, vacation checklists, all of that. The operations, like the running of a household. How does a household manager run and operate their household day to day? It
Hmm.
is the portion of the household that will go with you to the new house. Whereas the household reference binder is like, what color is the living room? How much mulch do you spread outside? How old is the grill? That kind of stuff may stay with the new homeowner. You would leave it with the house, whereas you're going to take yourself and your operations to the new location.
So, hearing that, and I'm just going to play the devil's advocate, some people
Yeah.
may think that is too rigid. That may take the spontaneity and the nuance of just life happening day to day. How do you address that?
Yeah, I am that person. So thanks for calling me out on that one. I am not a perfectionist and I'm not very detail oriented. So all of my systems, you can definitely make them really detail oriented, and some of my customers do. But I just do the like 80% global organization enough that I make sure I'm not going to miss like a major family member's birthday, or forget to give my dog the medicine that he needs. And then I actually have more time. What you don't realize is when you don't have systems in place, and most of us don't at home, not any fault of our own, they don't exist. Like you've never heard of systems like this before because you can't buy them at Bed Bath and Beyond, which is out of business, but you know what I mean. Don't worry about that part. So we don't think about setting up systems because they do appear rigid and they do take time, and there is homework to do them, kind of like the homework you gave me on my podcast today. There is homework to do this work. However, once the work is done, you stop looking for things. You stop worrying about things. You stop waking up at 3 a.m. going, I forgot that I need to do XYZ, because you have systems and places for that. And research has shown that we spend 55 minutes a day looking for things. Or a better example, this is just a general example I often will make. If you're going to stop by the grocery store on the way home and pick up a couple of things and you don't go with a list, and you come home, you inevitably forgot something. Then
Oh,
I've got to go
100%.
back to the store if it's worth it. You've lost all of that time because you don't have a good system. Now, a fairly rigid, would take a while to set it up, but once you do it, you'll love it system, is map out your grocery store and the things that you regularly buy in order on a piece of paper, and then Xerox that piece of paper. And then every time you're going to go make your grocery list, make your grocery list, and then look at that sheet of paper and see if there's anything on there that you forgot. And then order your grocery list in that order. You will get through that store so much faster, and you will save yourself so much time. So yes, you don't have the fun game of seeing if you can remember all 13 things on your list instead of 12, that spontaneity that you wanted. But what you do get is the right groceries in the house in less amount of time, which gives you more time. And that is the mission of Organize 365, not perfect organization. Organize 365 exists to get you functionally organized so you have more time to do what you are uniquely gifted and created to do. And so many of us don't have enough time at home to do those things because we're always trying to check off a never-ending to-do list. I don't want that for you. I want you to have time and capacity to be spontaneous, not at the grocery store, in life.
You know, it's funny. When you're talking about the grocery store, that's the one thing I religiously make a list for is the grocery store. And I will be honest with you, Lisa, there's times I've come out and still not have gotten everything on my list. For some reason, as I'm lingering down to the last couple items, I typically delete every item that I picked up and put into my cart. And for some reason, I always get a little bit cocky maybe. And I'm like, okay, I know these last two that I need to get. And then I go for it. And then I leave and then I look back and I'm like, damn, there are three more things on the list and I
Yep.
didn't get that third thing. So I totally respect and understand the importance of lists. But what I want to know, you sound so fluid and confident in this. Were you born
Oh.
out of the womb with this skill? How did you develop this?
I was a born organized child. That is true. And for a long time, I thought you either were or you weren't born organized. I thought, well, I'm sorry that you didn't have this gene, but I have it, so I'll come help you. Not, like an egotistical way, but I was like, this is my gift and I get to produce this gift. And then as I started organizing people professionally in my 40s, when I started this company, I would have clients that called me on the weekend and they would say, we don't need you to come back. And I thought, great, I offended them or they ran out of money. Like these are the thoughts that went through my head. And when I had a second one in the same weekend say the same thing to me, I said, oh, well, do you want to reschedule? She goes, no. I paid attention to the questions you've been asking me and I finished myself. So I called back the other one and I said, do you want to reschedule? And they said, no. We listened to the questions you were asking us and we finished ourselves. And I was like, oh, they learned how to be organized because of the way I taught them one-on-one. How do I then translate that to the internet? Because I already was Organized 365 was already a blog. That's when I started the podcast. And I said, okay, well, if I could talk to you on the podcast, it's a solo podcast, been going on almost 12 years, about just, household manager type things, I can get in your head and you will see your environment differently. You will ask yourself different questions like that prepaid store now. You won't be able to unsee that. Whenever you see a storage room, you will think prepaid store. And I create all these little stories and all this new vocabulary for this household that we live and work in. And so then you are able to make change on your own without me being in the household with you because you're thinking differently.
Why do you do this work?
Oh my gosh. So when well, first of all, I'm just a worker bee. I'm going to work till I'm 80. I mean, Martha Stewart's 82. So now maybe 82. I'm like, why would I stop working? And also when I was in-home organizing in Cincinnati, and I organized women that had a lot of money and didn't have a lot of money. And when I was done and those women were organized, they then went on and did other things like wrote books, went back to work. They did all these things. And I was like, why weren't they doing those things already? And the reason why they weren't was because their house wasn't organized enough. And often their spouse had not given them permission to leave the house until their homework was done. Like, this house doesn't look good, so you can't go back to work until you get a handle on this. You can't go back to work. You can't write that book until, the kids are better in school or whatever. And there was a lot of this pressure put on these women to meet this like childhood expectation of cleaning your bedroom before you're allowed to go out and play. That's just what I observed. And I then imagined all these women in golden cages, those bird cages with the door open, and they just wouldn't fly out the door because like their pride and their responsibility and what they felt was required of them was to get this house done, and they hadn't done their homework. So they didn't want to dream more for themselves or do more for themselves and sacrifice their family. That would be selfish. And I realized that, okay, we have got to stop selling the aesthetic of design and organization containers to women that is never ending. Like, it can always be prettier. It can always be better. My stuff isn't labeled. It could be labeled. It could be, like they're looking at Instagram and then they're looking at their house and they're like, yep, I'm not done yet. Yep, I'm not done yet. I'm like, this is ridiculous. Let's learn how to get a B plus. People, let's stop going for the A. No one's coming to your house anyway. Like, nobody's looking. Nobody cares. Nobody even knows what you're doing. So let's get this organized enough so that you feel comfortable that you've done your responsibility, and then free up this time for you to explore what you're uniquely gifted and created to do. I loved being a stay-at-home mom for a decade. Loved it. Lived, ate, breathed. It's all I ever wanted to do. And then when I turned 40, I was like, and now I'm going to do something else. I'm still very available to my kids and my grandkids and my husband, but also I'm a CEO of a business and I've now gone back and gotten my PhD. I'm allowed to have yes and. But being organized allows me to be yes and without having guilt and without having my family say to me, well, you haven't done this, or you didn't do this for us, or we can't find this, so you need to come home. There are many times when I and many other people would literally be going somewhere, something happens at home, and we turn our cars around and we skip whatever we were going to do and go home because lack of organization or delegation or information management systems required us to go home and solve the problem.
How did you push through that? Because I can imagine the system and the emotions are separate. You could have the system in play, but you could still feel emotionally pulled to be involved in that system still, and that guilt that you mentioned. How did you push past that?
So, can you tell I'm a type A personality? Um, I'm an idea person, a big picture person, and my parents told me I could be anything I wanted to be when I was an adult, and I believed them. So I'm like, I could do this, I could do that. And my husband is extremely supportive, but he's an employee mindset, and he's like, I don't understand why we always have to be breaking the mold and trying new things. Why can't you just be happy and go with the flow? I'm like, honey, I am where the flow comes from. He's like, no kidding. And so he'll say, like, this is working. Like, why do you have to do this? Why do you have to travel? Why do you have to get a PhD? Why do you have to? Because I want to. And I think, the older I get and the more confident I get in the woman I'm uniquely gifted and created to be, Dan Sullivan says, and he's also from Toronto, he says, to want something is enough. For a long time, I heard other people say, especially to women, no is a complete sentence. You could just say no. Like, are you going to be at the bake sale? No. You don't have to say, no, because, but I'll pick something up and drop it off. Like, no is a complete sentence. Well, I want to is also a complete sentence. Like, if a kid wants to play soccer, we sign them up. But if I, as an adult woman, want to get a PhD, I have to write a PowerPoint presentation and convince you why it's okay. Well, the company's paying for it, and I found the time, and I want to. When does it happen when we as adults aren't allowed to just want to do something because we want to do something? And if the resources are available and the time is available, why not? Why not?
That's very powerful. That's very powerful. As I'm sitting here listening to you, thinking about those words being a complete sentence, and it's a different paradigm shift for me to really think of it that way. I'm a person who I'm compelled to give a reason because there's that level of empathy of, I don't want this person to feel bad. I don't want them to get the wrong impression. I don't want them to walk away with a story that isn't accurate. So I give myself all these excuses as to why I need to explain why I want this or no. Like, there's still a time where people ask me, oh, you do a podcast? And I'm like, yeah. And they're like, why do you do a podcast? And I'm like, because I just want to do a podcast. You said something that I thought was very interesting is there's a level of messiness that you have when you're not organized that could essentially keep you stuck, keep you from moving and progressing into the actions and the goals that you want. Like you said, it's that bird in that cage. It's like, I still have stuff to do here in my feet. Therefore, I can't move forward until I get this stuff done. The problem is the stuff that you want to get done is stuff that could be done quite easily, quite quickly for the most cases. And then you can move on to that journey. So it almost sounds like a little bit of your brain giving yourself an excuse. So how do I navigate that?
Interesting. Okay, back to what you were saying about the podcast and I said about the PhD. I wanted to ask you a question. So when someone says they want to run a marathon, I find that people go, wow, which marathon? How are you going to train for that? Whereas when we say, I'm going to get a PhD and you say, I'm doing a podcast, maybe people just don't have as big of a understanding of people who have podcasts or who have gotten PhDs. They just don't have a big enough inventory of information in their brain to talk about it. And sports is so in the lexicon that anything sports related is kind of like, oh, well, you're going to run a marathon. Well, you need 20 hours a week. Great. Go for it. Whereas if you need 25 hours a week for a PhD, why? I don't understand how this is going to net return, anyways.
Yeah.
Just an observation I have. Some things are socially acceptable and other things are like, okay, we're going to put you over there in that box. Okay. So back to your question about the messiness. So you say it can be done relatively quickly. And I thought, oh, because it's going to take a year. So it's interesting that we had a
Hmm.
different perception about that.
Well, and I didn't want to devalue the messiness that a lot of people go through. It's obviously on a scale, right?
Yeah.
But what I meant by that, and it's not about getting it done so you can move on, because I don't think
Hmm.
anything's ever 100% done.
Right.
But how do you get it to where it's good enough, where you feel as
Yeah.
though you can go and depart on the journey that you are aspiring for, versus holding yourself in that position to not move forward until you believe you have it done at 100%.
Okay. So I'm going to give you an analogy I use called Swiss cheese organizing. And this is what I did for decades. It would be, we're coming up on a long weekend. So it would be a long weekend. And I'd be like, that's it. We're going to take back this house. And so I would come in with all this energy. I'd get a pizza on Friday night. We're going to start hard on Friday night. We're not even waiting until Saturday morning. Like, we're going to take back this house. Start with the garage, and then we're going to do the kitchen, and then the kids' bedrooms. And we get to the end of the weekend, I'd be like, okay, it looks pretty good. We're done. And then the next 3 day weekend or long weekend, I would do the same thing over and over and over again. And what I found I was doing was Swiss cheese organizing. I was tackling the same areas in the house with a lot of energy every time I had a break in order to have more visual order in the house. Now, you have a daughter, I have kids. How long does that bedroom stay organized once we do the full all day clean out?
Minutes.
Okay, so what the heck are we doing? Why are we focusing our precious 3 day weekend on these kids' bedrooms? Now, I am all for kids learning how to organize their bedrooms. I call them mini apartments. I got a whole thing on that. However, when you as an adult have a lot of energy and a big long weekend, don't focus any time on the children because it's not going to make a marked improvement. What I think would be better is to focus on yourself. And people are like, how does that work? What does that even look like? Okay, great. I'll tell you. So what that looks like is you do your bathroom, your bedroom, your closet. When was the last time you cleaned and organized your bedroom?
Oh my goodness. I do it every 2 weeks typically.
Wow. Okay. Wow. I'm impressed. You
Hmm.
organize your bedroom every 2 weeks?
Yeah, well, you're talking about like inside the drawers and the closets.
Yeah.
Um, I probably do that ad hocly every once in a while. I'm a very neat person by nature. I like
Great.
things very symmetrical. I like
We're all
my
like now
my
listening
clothes.
to you.
Well, I like all my clothing and the colors that I go from like my blacks all the way to my whites. So I do things like that, and if things are out of place, I'll address it.
Okay, so you're
But
already organized.
yeah, I'm pretty organized. I'm
Okay.
just a neat person by nature, so I love to see organization.
Okay. So you're already organized. Was there ever a time in your life when you weren't organized?
Oh yeah, oh
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
Oh,
So I was organized.
and actually
Yeah.
to that point, I think there's parts of my life that I'm not organized in. Even though
Okay.
I may organize, like, say, my space really well, there's other areas of my life that may not be
Okay.
as
Oh, you're
organized.
a human. Okay, good. We can keep having this conversation then. So, what I found was I used to be really organized, and I was that stay at home mom, and then I went back to work for a little stint, and everything blew up. And my bedroom became basically living in a storage room because I put everything in there that I hadn't put away yet or I didn't have a place for. I didn't want the kids to get in it, you know. And so, for a lot of people, their bedroom becomes a dumping ground because no one goes there, but people can see like the laundry room and the family room and the playroom. So they'll keep cleaning those spaces and they'll actually wake up and go to bed in what looks like a storage room because no one sees it but you. But I love how you have your personal spaces because it makes you feel great, doesn't it? Like you
Hmm.
go to bed and you wake up in an organized space. And that's what I want for you first. Focus on those spaces first. After that, if you can stand it, then I want you to do the prepaid store. Because when you have the prepaid store done, then this little bit of anxiety that's weighing down, like, I think I have that, but I don't know what I have. And I really don't even know what's down there. And it really should be cleaned up, but it isn't. And I don't really know what to, like, that goes away. You don't think that way anymore. After you're done with that space, then you tackle the paper and the information management and really get that in order because, you know, if anything does happen to you, how is somebody going to care for you if they don't know the information that you know? And if you have everything stored digitally, it's actually worse because they have to have passwords. The
Hmm.
nice thing about old people is they're old. Some of them don't even have computers, so you don't need to know their passwords because everything's going to come in the snail mail. It's actually not as hard as you think it's going to be. It's going to get harder when baby boomers really start to retire and need our help because they have computers,
Hmm.
and I don't think their passwords written down. So, you just start to chunk at like, what is the thing that is really a bottleneck right now or causing friction? For you, it might be, the digital organization on your computer or the home office or something like that.
You said something, we're human. And there may be this idea, especially after hearing you talk, that organized people have it all together. How do you respond to that?
Organized people have more capacity to support themselves and others in time of need. So yes, organized people have more capacity. They don't have it all together, but they don't have the unknowns of, I don't know where this thing is. I don't have a system for this. So when emergencies happen, it is the most organized people who can literally drop their own schedule and step in and support you and yours because they know what they're dropping. If you're not organized, you'll drop everything to support a friend in need, but you don't really even know what you didn't get done because there wasn't a system to tell you what you were doing at that time. And you create a bigger future problem for yourself, even though you will help someone in a time of need. You do it in a different capacity, a different amount of capacity.
Sometimes I get a little enthralled with chaos. So I'm curious, have you ever been in a situation yourself where you were disorganized or an outcome happened due to disorganization? And what sort of chaos did that cause for you?
I mean, yes. Um, yes. How many times? What happens when I am in a situation that is disorganized, and I do like a certain amount of disorganization also, because there is some creativity in that. When something gets to the point where I cannot organize it, or I don't see a time in the near future when, all right, I'll live through this chaos, but then at this point, I'll be able to reset the systems. I become very anxious and I actually become a raving lunatic. You don't like to be around me. And actually, that's what my dissertation showed. We were looking to see if women who have higher perspective memory strength, meaning that they're better at remembering the things they need to do in the future, had less anxiety than women who did not have good systems for remembering what they needed to do in the future. And what I found was women who did not have good systems for what they needed to do in the future basically had a pretty high level of worry to start with. Like they're just always worried, they're always anxious. Whereas women who had good perspective memory strength and good systems started the day with no anxiety, no worry. Like everybody in my family has anxiety but me, including the dog. So I like to say I'm where anxiety comes from, I guess. I'm the only one that doesn't start the day with anxiety. However, in my dissertation, I found that as the load increased, as all the tasks throughout the day increased, women who had better systems and stronger perspective memory experienced an increase in anxiety more sharply than other women. Now, it rose to just a little bit higher than their level of worry did. So it wasn't like they had more anxiety overall, but going from none to a lot happened more sharply. And my chair said, yeah, that's because organized people like you, Lisa, when you get a bee in your bonnet, you just and you just can't handle it and you just fly off the handle. I was like, I do resemble that remark. that is probably accurate. But I have so many systems and supports in place that rarely happens.
So somebody not like you, thinking that they do not have the same level of organizational ability at this stage, is listening. What would you want to say to them to help them move into a more organized direction?
I would say to them, you're probably somebody who knows how to move your body athletically and didn't start working out in your 50s like me. And so you look at me and you go, how in the world did you get all the way to 50 and like not do a single workout? And if you watch me in a Pilates reformer class, I have a new teacher now, and she'll do a new exercise. And I'm like, my body doesn't do that. And she's like, no, it does. I'm like, no, it doesn't. And she has to come over and she has to fight with me like I'm a 2-year-old and then I can do it. I'm like, oh, I know how to do that. So what I would say is, you have a gift and a strength that you've developed your entire lifetime, and you just think that way. Like you're just fiscally responsible, or you're really good at moving your body, or you're great at marketing or something. But this organization is a weakness that you have. I'm really good at organization, and everything else is probably a weakness. Like even school is a weakness. I got through the PhD, but I did not get all A's. So this is a weakness, but it's a lifelong skill, and it is worth developing the organizational muscles And I could practically teach you how to do that step by step. It's not overwhelming. It's fun. You can learn just like whatever your passion is that you love to teach people about. This is my passion that I love to teach people about. And so if you want to grow those organization muscles, if you want to put some simple systems into your household, I can help you do that.
I like that. It's like having that childlike mentality of curiosity
Yeah.
with the adult frame of planning.
Yes.
It is,
Love
it
that.
is, yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Thank you, Lisa. Is there anything that
Thank you.
we didn't touch on today that you wanted to talk about?
No, this was such a rich and fascinating conversation. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for having it with me.
Yeah, thank you. And this is the part where I turn it to you once again to close us out for the letter to your former self.
All right. Dear younger Lisa, prioritize life experiences and keep asking questions. Daydreaming and playing with different outcomes to solutions in your mind is actually your superpower. The more you can visualize the solution to a problem, the easier it will be to discuss and collaborate with others to bring forth that vision. Here's the secret I have found. No one will show up and explicitly give you permission to chase your dreams and make manifest the visions you have in your mind. But that's okay because no one is there to stop you either. You can do, be, and have anything you imagine in collaboration with others who share your vision. So dream and do.